never start your golf swing like this. It is an absolute killer and something I see day in, day out. The fault I made there and highlighted is actually my shoulders, my torso didn't really turn a whole lot in that first movement. So what moved the club back? Well, if you focus here, it's really the over rotation here of my trail forearm. And that's getting that club behind me, and that's getting that club face wide open. And this fault I see with iron and driver, but it's going to be even more destructive when we start talking about the driver. So when golfers get that club face excessively open, they are struggling because they're going to hit the ball for right-hander way out right unless they're making a lot of compensations through impact, a lot of hands and arms, and it relies then on timing, of course, which they might hit some good, but it's not going to be consistent, is it? So if this is a fault you have where you're constantly seeing that club behind your hands and you're constantly seeing the club face open, I have for you a great feel and a couple of great exercises. Now let's just quickly talk about where the club face should be in case you're confused with that first movement. When the club is at parallel to the ground, so the grip end and the head are the same distance away from the ground, I would like the club to be level with my hands or slightly outside my hands. I don't want to see the club getting behind my hands at that stage. And I'd like the leading edge of the golf club, and it's a little bit harder to see with a driver because it has that curved bottom edge, but we want the leading edge of the golf club more to match my back angle. It was taught a little bit, more old school to try and get the toe more up in the air and relied a little bit more on hands and arms in the release. I'd say the modern day movement that you'll see with the majority of elite golfers is they'll get the club face more matching their back angle. And there are some great players out there who actually go more extreme than that. There's very few who get that club face open in that first movement because it relies so much on timing. So the feel I'm going to have here, I'm just going to focus for a second on my trail arm and trail hand movement. And I'm just going to try and feel like I keep the underneath of my trail arm and my wrist pointing at the target that little bit longer. So the first movement is actually more with torso rotation rather than forearm roll that we start to see here. Okay, so we're going to feel like we keep the underneath, the inside edge of my trail hand and forearm pointing more at the target for that little bit longer. And that keeps my elbow in a similar position. So my elbow is pointing in front of me. If I rolled it here, you'll start to see it actually pointing more behind me rather than in front of me. So we want to cut out this roll. And you'll see a lot of good golfers, and I'm going to hit one doing this, they rehearse the movement before they go ahead and hit. So that the last thing they do, that relevant muscle memory that they've got, is making that takeaway movement that they want to see. So if we can get the club face good here, there's a better chance of it being good here. I can't guarantee it, but you've got more chance. If you get that club face wrong here, you've got to work very, very hard. So we're going to rehearse that move. I'm feeling it all torso, very little, almost dead arms and hands. No roll, no rotation. So rehearse that movement and then go ahead and try and pull the trigger. Okay, so I've possibly overdrawn it just a touch. Hit the fairway, just missed on that left side, but I know that club face wasn't open. And that is the real killer that I see with so many amateur golfers is they're leaking the ball outright. They're adding a ton of loft to the driver. And the amount of golfers I meet when I measure them and they're struggling with distance to the driver, and often they say to me, I'm hitting the 3-wood as far as the driver. And normally the reason is they're adding so much loft to the driver. I often see people doubling the loft of their driver dynamically by the time I hit the ball. And that is generally because of an open club face here. The other reason you may start to see that, if that explains your ball flight, high, weak, less distance, it can be that the handle is excessively back. But again, that tends to be linked to this first movement, because if I get the club face way open here, I'm almost having to stall my hands to try and speed up the club to try and close that club face. And that's why it's such an inconsistent move. So I want you to focus a lot on what should control the movement, torso rotation. What shouldn't? The rolling of this trail arm, forearm, wrist here. So we don't want to see this type of movement. Now, golfers who make this movement, they can't continue on. So what we see when they make this fault and they get the club behind them and open is then a lifting movement. And if this looks familiar, this is your fault. So if you're this way at the top with that flying trail elbow position, a very cupped lead wrist or bent this way, we've got that club face excessively open. And it's because the golfer goes early in with that roll. They can't keep going, so they lift. And as they lift to the top, that's where that cupping position comes from. Just a couple of drills and a couple exercises, but the first thought is, why don't we rehearse that movement before we go ahead and hit? Feel torso rotation. Arms are just connected to what my body's doing. I'm not clamping down the golf club, but I'm just not allowing roll here with the forearms. So rehearse it and then hit it. That one felt pretty solid. Exactly the same shot actually, just a little bit longer. You can see I'm slightly overdrawing it, and this hole actually bends, if anything, a little right, so would perhaps play more for the fade. But I'm pretty happy that I'm demonstrating a draw there, because what I'm trying to get out of is that open club face, that miss outright to target, and that doesn't seem a bad place to miss on this hole. And this is perhaps the hardest club to do it with, but the movement would be the same, whether we're talking about a short iron, a mid iron, a driver, it doesn't matter. That first movement is so destructive. So a couple of drills that you can do. A simple one, but I've always loved it, is just get an alignment stick, a tall stick, and just put it up the side of the golf club. Or perhaps you could get something a little bit thinner that could actually push into the end of the grip here. And I just want you to make that first movement and keep the connection of the cane across your body. So it's probably just in contact with around the hip here, and I'm keeping that contact to that first movement. The cane will come away from my body, but it comes away from my body now. And a lot of people say to me, well, I get this first movement, but how do I move the club to the top from there? For me, once you're in that movement, it is coiling the chest correctly. So it's getting my lead shoulder moving down underneath my chin as my arms work up. So the movement from that takeaway is lead shoulder working down and across, and that gets my arms working up. And from there you'll see a good trail arm position rather than this fault that we see with so many people who struggle with that early takeaway movement. Now, when people struggle with this early takeaway movement, the club rolling inside, we see that their arms work a long way away from their chest, their body. So the other way you could use an alignment stick, a tall stick, is just going to be across your chest, just above your elbows. And the idea is keep it, don't drop it. And what I want you to focus on here is you'll actually see it's connected to my chest, but it's also starting to tilt. So the side that's closest to the target is starting to point more down. So my lead shoulder is already working down and in front of me, and my trail shoulder is already working up and behind me. Golfers who make this movement, their shoulders are actually pretty level, but they get a lot of run away here with their arm away from their chest, and you can see they're going to struggle with that club face. So, and this is perhaps one you could do more on the range when you're hitting shots. So it's sticking out of that hole there in the glove. So I've got this green T-peg, and I'm going to use that as my almost marker, my laser point, if you like. And I'm just going to make that movement and feel like I keep that pointing towards the golf ball for longer. If I get that early runaway, you can start to see where this T-peg is pointing way out in front of me rather than down towards the golf ball. So when we're hitting shots, I'm just going to hit one more. On the range or in casual golf, why not just use a T-peg there and just get that sensation? That's that first movement. How do I get the club to the top? This lead shoulder moving down and in front of me, trail shoulders moving up and behind, and that will set the arms in a good position at the top. Rehearse it, hit it. There we go, that one's going to catch the fairway. That's the longest of the bunch, so we'll definitely finish with that one. So 3 simple exercises, just focusing on what the forearms and wrists don't do and what the torso does do in that first movement. Get it right, and I know you're going to find the golf swing just a ton easier. If that does help, make sure you put some comments below, smash the like button, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more content just like this.